will be here in
and we are waiting for Barnes. How are we doing? Rich, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. Good to be back. Rich Baris, People's Pundit. Most people know me by director at Big Data Poll.
Awesome. Allison.
And I'm Alison Morrow. I'm trying to eat lunch right now while doing this because I'm an 8-month-old. I'm a former TV news reporter who quit in 2019. And I have a YouTube channel now where I do a lot of free speech, social media, content moderation, which people like to call censorship. And I have all these people always say, it's not censorship, it's content moderation. So I'm trying to do better about the terminology, but getting booted off of platforms and stuff like that.
That's suppression. We talked about that.
That's good. I like that suppression.
Suppression.
Yeah. So I kind of focus on that stuff.
Yeah, we don't like your message. And then, Barnes is Barnes. He'll come. Just hang out, everybody. Trust us. I wanted to get you guys on here first thing, and always want to have Barnes on, but you're kind of like the last honest, or one of the last honest pollsters and one of the last honest journalists. So since you're a rarity, I can actually fit everybody honest on the screen.
That's nice. That is one benefit of where we're at, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good way to go. And I'm thrilled. I see there's a bunch of people. This is going to be completely loose and free, but I've got to do the whole Viva Fry thing in the beginning because I don't even have his ability to control chats, or super chats, or anything else. I'm nowhere near that nimble of mind. So I will try to get to everybody as things come in, super chat wise, whatever, but I don't really know that I can do it. And, if you're uncomfortable with that, please don't, don't donate if you're not comfortable and I can't get to it. I really do appreciate it though. And I definitely want to wing it. And let's start off with Rich. We're right out the gate. We have a brand new president. He's not asleep on the job. I give him credit. I mean, I figured that he might be asleep in the basement already, but he's already signing legislation like crazy. How's that polling?
Yeah, so we've done the Keystone XL pipeline already because that was in the news. That was always widely popular. It's funny, Eric, right off the bat, and I've seen this for years, but it may be a little bit higher this time. So we'll ask people, do you support the Keystone XL pipeline? Do you expect there'll be higher gas prices under Joe Biden? So we're asking a slew of these questions. Overwhelmingly, it's not just a regional thing. Overwhelmingly, people supported the Keystone XL pipeline. 20% of Biden voters, Eric, support it and had no idea that he would get rid of it. They had no clue. It really shows you still, as the misinformation, everybody knows the media is full of it. But it really does show you that they still have an enormous amount of persuasion power because we're telling these people for the first time. It's incredible.
Well, and here's a very interesting factoid. I don't know if you're deep into it, but Allison actually was the environmental reporter. So
really?
I don't know if you've done research on the Keystone Pipeline. That's one of those, hot button topics. And there are people on both sides. Some who are saying, no, it's not destroying the environment. That's rubbish. It's like the Alaskan pipeline. I know that people have gone back and forth on that. Meanwhile, they have some species who are supposedly almost extinct hanging out near the pipes. So,
yeah, I did not really. I was just looking up some details. I didn't cover the Keystone Pipeline really. I covered DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, quite a bit. Not a ton, but I definitely more often than some of these other. Of course, we had, for instance, like when Shell Oil's drill rig was. This was under Obama when it was stationed in the Seattle area. There were all these protests, and I'll never forget. They protested in kayaks, and so we were gonna try to do something like on a boat, right? Because like a small boat that we could be among the kayaktivists is what they were called. And
nice. I love portmanteaus.
Yeah, but we needed something a little bit more stable so that when I was doing my live shot, I wasn't like doing this the whole time and making people barf. So we had a sort of normal sized fishing boat, but it broke the day of. So the only other thing that we could get was a yacht. It was a 60 or 70 foot yacht. It was huge. And so I was like looking down on it. So then they hated me too, because they're like, you're burning so much oil. And I'm like, I'm sorry. So it's just like damned if you do, damned if you don't. But no, I honestly, a lot of the times when I would cover, they're all different, but kind of the same. The sort of the version of the criticism, I guess, or the people that want to stop it often tends to be like, we need to stop investing in this kind of stuff. We need to start investing in green energy. Then the counterpoint to that is we're not there yet where it's going to make it feasible for the average American. We need to have domestic oil. So it's a complicated topic. You probably don't want to spend your entire podcast on it. But yes, I was an environmental reporter.
I do want to address it a little bit. I mean, it's like, I can't just say, hey, this is stupid. You're signing things off without saying, well, is there any concern? Is there anything of it? I haven't specifically heard. Alison, I shared this with you, and I probably should have shared it with you guys. I apologize. Have you ever heard Michael Crichton speaking about State of Fear when he was doing research for that book?
No, I know who he is, but I don't know that specifically.
Okay. He is the author of Jurassic Park. Of course, everybody knows, and Westworld. He wrote that. That was his first movie. He was going to write a disaster movie, and he thought, okay, well, let me check out, obviously, the worst disaster in history. Chernobyl, right?
Chernobyl, yeah.
It can't get any worse, right? How many people died at Chernobyl?
Guess. The actual event that day?
Yeah.
Nobody, right?
It was like 56, I think, died.
They didn't die later? They died that day.
Right. In the midst of, escape and everything else. And
okay.
The irony about it, and I forget the exact number, but it's online, but he was talking about how it was 20,000 people were victimized and all of these numbers. And then when he researched it, none of this panned out. And I worry about, environmental things like that. I know Allison's in the Northwest, and I mean, I've heard a lot about the spotted owl. We have a little bit of that in Arizona, and it can get frustrating with a different size.
Well, first off, I realized that you sent me homework to watch that video. And I just realized I didn't. So I got to watch that so I know about the Jurassic Park thing. But
no piggy.
Yeah, well, it's just unfortunately a lot of times it gets so divisive between it's often a jobs versus wildlife or environmental issue. And it's too bad because of that, people who I think would actually be inclined to support some of these issues become adversaries, unfortunately. Part of that, I'm sure, has to go with the activists. I mean, they don't always do the best job of. I've been in rooms and I've moderated panels where you're just like, you want to crawl under a rock and die. You're like, because you're trying to moderate and keep everybody civil, but you're like, but they don't have to be your enemy. So I do sometimes put responsibility and the onus on them to do a better job, I think, of reaching out. But it also just the way that we covered it sometimes in the media made it difficult. Like we've talked on your channel before about how fast paced my job used to be and how I had to keep stories to 90 seconds or less. And that doesn't really tee you up for a nuanced conversation about how we could move things forward. It does tend to sort of become kind of this dialectic, adversarial way of doing storytelling. And so I don't think that helps either. And we could talk forever about how that's gotten us to where we are now in the national political scene. But as far as the environment was concerned, I definitely saw that on a microcosmic level.
Okay. And I'm going to jump in with the first super chat, but I think it's a good way to start things out lively. Hi, Robert. Hi, Eric. How are you feeling about the articles of impeachment filed today against Joe Biden? I tend to personally, I agree with Viva Fry or David Freiheit. What do you want? And let's say you impeach him. Let's say he's convicted. Then you get Kamala Harris. Is that an improvement?
Well, they know it's not going to pass. And in fact, I forwarded Viva today. Marjorie's already raising money off of it. So, and I want to like some of these Congress people. I think, returning the favor makes sense. I'm not a favor of political weaponization of impeachment, but that ship has now clearly sailed. So at some point, it's just, hey, it's going to be tit for tat from here on out. Whatever you do, we do. And I think you'll see the Trumpist wing of the congressional part of the Republican Party retaliate across the board, retaliate with questions in terms of how they treat potential cabinet nominees, retaliate in impeachment. It won't stop with what I told some of Green's people and other people. I was like, you might as well just initiate impeachment efforts against both against both Biden and Harris. And then, and you should probably go ahead and initiate expulsion proceedings against Pelosi and Schumer if they're going to try to expel them. Let's see what this looks like. It's, if you want to add 6 justices to the Supreme Court, okay. Talk about when the Republicans come back in, we're going to add 21. We can keep it ramping. The only thing that has prevented one party from weaponizing the processes that were not meant to be overtly partisan has been that the other party will retaliate in kind when it has power.
Right.
The reality is the reason why Democrats have no fear of this right now is because Republicans almost never have. My friends on the left kind of think they have, but they really haven't. Not at that scale. They go after your anti-war whistleblower types when the W's are in charge. They don't go after institutional sources of power. When they split the Senate in 2000, after the 2000 elections, they cut a deal. A power. I guarantee you, Schumer's not going to do that same deal. We live in very different times. So I think that to Cleopatra's question, I don't mind the impeachment because I understand Viva's perspective. His perspective is, and I agree with it in theory, that if we should not weaponize impeachment as a partisan tool. We should limit impeachment. Otherwise, impeachment just we create parliamentary democracy with just super majorities rather than just regular majorities is what happens. But the flip side is, honestly, Democrats, that ship sailed when they decided to impeach Trump not once but twice. So
without a hearing,
I'm not going to hearing tears for it.
Yeah, how is that polling, Rich, or have you done anything on that?
We have. Yeah, impeachment is polling very badly. I had a laugh, and I'm just going to be much harder on these people moving forward because if you blow an election, if you cannot poll an election, then you have no business polling public opinion on issues or events, because the only real test of a pollster is election day, of the test of their accuracy. And some of these people failed abysmally, right? So Morning Consult polls for Politico, they were terrible. They blew Pennsylvania by 9 points. What on earth are you doing taking their money and polling something so important as impeachment? And they found what they found. This is the headline Politico wants. So they gave it to them. When they found 1 in 5 Republicans supported the conviction of Trump in the Senate. That was a total joke. That their textbook response bias. You talk to 10 Republicans, then maybe 3 or 4 Bill Kristol like Republicans. Doesn't mean you got to correct a representative sample. So that is basically what they're doing wrong moving forward. So even with Biden, though, you really only have diehard people that want to do, like Robert said, this tit for tat. That was the real danger of Democrats doing what they did, not just with impeachment, but a slew of other norms that they broke. Moving forward, we're just going to have this back and forth tit for tat. Americans really, they're forward looking, Eric. They don't like to look backward. They like to keep moving forward. They want progress. They want somebody to turn and focus on the problems they have. They do not want to see either Trump impeached and convicted or Biden. It's a joke. Really, this is the stuff that makes Americans angry.
And I think, to Richard's point, another norm I think that's going to be gone. A lot of my Democratic friends were shocked. I was like, the honeymoons are over. The days of getting elected and having a honeymoon for 3 months. Democrats completely, the Trump haters completely took that away from Trump. I mean, they made it a nightmare. Yep. They made it like you just found out you married the abusive husband. You didn't know.
You mean the meme of that woman going, ah?
Exactly.
On your wedding night. Yeah.
I'm melting.
Exactly. It was like a story from that movie, first film reference. The one with Jack Nicholson. No, not Jack Nicholson. Tom Hanks. I think it's Tom Hanks. His dad is Jackie Gleason. What was the name of that movie? and his turned out his dad was like really bad with his mom. Okay, nobody's remembers like Steel Magnolia. It's not Steel Magnolias, but it's something like
that's Julia.
You know,
Roberts.
all those cry movies remind me of the same. They're the same title. You know what I mean?
Cry movies.
It's
Okay,
one of those.
I'll
It's one of the cry movies.
New T-shirt.
But the honeymoon time is over. I don't think there'll be some fake polls that show Biden with 60% plus approval or whatever other nonsense.
It's nonsense. He's a 47% president, by the way. Just to throw that in there.
I mean, he like 47%. Trump, he's going to be the first president to not have. He's going to be the second president now. But no more honeymoons. No more with high mid 60s. I thought he really blew a chance at the inauguration. He could have said shut down the Trump impeachment. He really wasn't giving up anything because it's in my view, a constitution, Dershowitz's view, Turley's view, a constitutionally dubious impeachment anyway, that is unlikely to get 2/3 of the Senate simply because of what Richard's talking about. It doesn't poll well within the Republican Party. And as Rand Paul said, it could kill the party overnight. That's the reason why Trump is leaking stories about Patriot Party and third parties. He wants to remind them all that he doesn't have to primary them to get them back. He can kill the Republican Party in one stroke if he wants.
That's it.
He may not get power himself, but he can kill the Republicans for a decade.
Nothing in common, Robert. Laura knew the movie. She's binging me. It's nothing in common. That's it. She knows it.
I wasn't going to use the phrase chick flick because that might be but women would know the title better. That's all I'm saying.
Well, actually,
it was a good chick flick.
Let's reach back because this kind of rolls into the super chat about the future of the Republican Party, but also we have what happened January 6th, and Allison had on somebody who was actually there, Photog. And what was the vibe that you got from that live stream? Like what actually happened, from somebody on the ground?
With the riot at the Capitol?
Yeah.
Well, a lot happened. So basically this guy, Jeremy Lee Quinn, he's really interesting and I highly recommend people look up his stuff. He's on Twitter. He also has a website. He posts his stuff, publicreport.org. And he has been following both kind of the Antifa Black Bloc left. And then also he's been following kind of the MAGA movement. And he's really, I think, trying hard to understand the cross section here and what's actually going on instead of kind of oversimplifying it or painting with sort of a broad brush what I think a lot of national news organizations have done and have done an injustice, I think, to really understanding what's going on. So look him up because he's got some good stuff. But he essentially said that he was running into all kinds of different people, but the vast majority were talking to him about globalism, constitutionality, sort of concern over the U.S. government's encroaching on their rights, freedom of speech. There was a lot of anti-big tech. And that most of them, he said there were a lot of people that were kind of pearl clutchy excited, like about what was going to happen. And they were kind of there for the excitement, but weren't necessarily like there to originally like storm the Capitol. Like they hadn't shown up there with this in mind, but there were people there that had, I wouldn't say they were by any means near the majority at all. I think there were probably a small portion that he ran into, but had not only come there with some idea to cause trouble in mind, but they had taken tactics from the Antifa playbook to do what they ended up doing. That's what he said. In fact, talked to somebody who identified himself as like a National Socialist type guy, like almost a neo-Nazi type guy, and that he was there and had even just admitted, like we read up on some of the tactics that we saw used over the last few months, and that's where I've gotten some of my ideas. And so he said that was a small minority of the people who were there, but that those people did exist, and that honestly, the regular person, like the average person who was there, was somebody who felt disenfranchised by the government, concerned about globalism, concerned about the Constitution, concerned about free speech, concerned about obviously the election. And then that was more so like this mob mentality that just kind of started to grow over several hours. And that, he saw some interesting similarities really, which I know the two sides probably don't like to be grouped together, but he saw some similarities between these two, the sort of fringy sides, I guess, on the left and the right, in the things that they were talking about, the injustices that they said they were witnessing, and the concerns they had with the U.S. government at that point.
Didn't he say it was unusual, though, for the right wingers, as he put it, to be violent?
He did say that he had been covering these MAGA rallies for a while, and that was one of his questions about what happened with the policing there, was like, I don't know, maybe, they weren't expecting this, or I kind of question that, but just like that in the past, these events where you get together and like even the past Stop the Steal events hadn't turned violent. And so that was one of his thoughts about, well, maybe that was kind of initially anyway, that was why things were allowed to get out of hand. I don't know. But yeah, he did say that.
So Rich and Robert, is this Q driven?
Partially. So that's how you get the military people participating. Because I'm going to study QAnon.
I'm
even though
trying to
now get more hate.
work.
You got real hate when you had that guy that questioned on QAnon on Eric.
No, I'm trying to find a neutral expert. I've got some feelers out there from from Intel folks to hopefully find out if there's a
I would,
psyops.
particularly some people that understand. You could have maybe just some people that understand psyops in general. It was extraordinary that someone from Army psyops in North Carolina helped organize people to go there. Wasn't apparently part of the writing part, but it's the kind of thing that's going to feed conspiracy theories for decades. But I think it's a couple of groups. One, QAnon is what gave that, like the lady who died. How does that happen? Well, if you think you've been deputized by an inside group of the military and law enforcement, then they actually want you there to help effectuate the arrest against the black hats within the deep state, including Pelosi and whomever. Then that gives you, it's like communism. Communism's genius was saying this is just going to happen. This is inevitable. It gave people incredible power to do things that on paper were irrational. Che goes down to Bolivia and he thinks he's going to do a revolution overnight. He had support of like 5 farmers, but he's seen it work in Cuba, but for different reasons. But part of how you believe that is you think this is just the inevitable outcome. It's sort of like Calvinism in religion. It's just politics. It's just this was predestined to happen, and that gives you more motivation to do so. But also, QAnon was critical. Without QAnon, I don't think most of the riot occurs. The second part was the infiltration of a growing group called the Boogaloo Boys. And they are, and what Alison is talking about, there is this sort of almost concentric alignment between the alt-left and the alt-right. The Antifa, some aspects of BLM, not all of BLM is really sort of more distinct. Antifa is more hardcore.
Eventually, they just kind of
exactly, because like you're all right and all left people agree on racialized politics in certain respects. They agree on violence as a tool of means of achieving and attaining what you want. Now the Boogaloo Boys are like totally weird. I heard about them about a year ago, and I was like, what in the world is this? Because a lot of them have no core ideological beliefs, like some members of Antifa do. Not most of Antifa is ideological, but there's portions of it that are really just sort of anarchistic and love chaos.
Are they anarchists? Like Michael Malice kind of throws himself out there like he is.
Yeah, Michael Malice is like pure. Now he hates violence. He makes that clear. So for anybody out there watching, and he's probably the greatest troll alive. Man, he tells some brutal, man. Even I'm like, oh, I don't think I could tell that joke. That's rough. That's tough. But a brilliant guy, brilliant, fascinating intellectual personality. He'd be a good guy for you to have on. Eric,
working on it.
Perfect. Yeah, give him. I interviewed him for when I was doing a show briefly on the pandemic in the spring or summer. But to Alison's point, you had a combination of events that almost had to be the perfect storm, which will be ironic for all the Q people out there because they were waiting for the storm for 4 years. That's literally what they called it. So whenever Trump used a reference to storm, they're like, this is a sign. And Trump's people did not take seriously enough the threat that QAnon as a movement was, because Trump just sort of dismissed it as media hyping up something. He'd been hearing them hype it up for 4 years, so he was done with that. And he thought, it's a group that supports me, so I don't want to say anything negative about him. but the reality is he should have. And he never would have even had the rallies had he known there was a risk of this, because it was so damaging to his reputational interest. I mean, killed his election challenge overnight. I mean, any legacy he could have from it politically going forward was basically completely muted by this, overshadowed by this. But it was a combination of QAnon, this rising group, the Boogaloo Boys that sort of infiltrated.
And they're not like the Proud Boys, right?
Not the Proud
Boys. These guys are dark. I mean, the Proud Boys are a joke.
The Boogaloo Boys will go and make fun of the Proud Boys. So they make fun of BLM and Antifa. I don't even understand them yet. I can't get my head wrapped around them entirely. You know, it'd be like if Michael Malice really believed his own book on the new right, and then like took a bunch of mushrooms or something, you know, and then it's some combination like that I can't even get my head around. They were the only ones to show up at any state capitals on the 20th with some Boogaloo Boys who were just making fun of Antifa that were there. So it's some sort of, I don't even understand it.
It sounds like an insane clown posse mixed with the Proud Boys.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I say it suggests something seriously wrong with our civil society and our government when groups like this emerge that are almost like the Pirate Bay, except willingness to use violence. It's like, whoa, hold on, what is this exactly? So I think that, but they were a component. There were some older militia types there that were your true Q believers who were helping organize what happened at the event. But what they did is what Alison mentioned was exactly right. They utilized Antifa techniques for how you weaponize a crowd. So how do you use a crowd to infiltrate an event? How do you use a crowd to leverage that crowd to help you get away with what you want to get away with? I mean, Antifa just originated as in its modern form as the Black Bloc, which was simply a crowd technique. How to hide within the crowd, how to use a crowd, how to organize a crowd, how to and if it shows what everybody kind of forgets is you can get a crowd to do crazy things if they're of a certain mindset and you just remove the rules. This is what the whole broken windows theory was of crime in New York City in the 90s, was that if you see graffiti, you're like, there's no rules left. So maybe I'll just go ahead and rob today. Whereas if somehow everything is pristine around you, you just don't feel that same instinct or impulse. The opportunity may be present, but you don't act upon it. There's a lot of this, but this is why I'm skeptical of where QAnon came from. That's not a random message board.
That's right.
Going on.
Is it possible that it started that way and somebody hijacked it?
Say again?
Is it possible that it started that way and it was catching on and then somebody hijacked it? I mean, it was really nice for that.
It used very unique techniques from the get-go. So other than the promising Hillary Clinton would be arrested, there was a use of high pressure sales techniques, use of a person who makes fantasy games where you incorporate simulated reality with a fantasy.
Eric Weinstein has been talking about that, LARPing.
Yes.
Live action role playing.
Exactly. Live action role playing.
Yep.
QAnon incorporated that very early on. And like the way I would look at it is take a look at your 4chan board, or if you go back and look at it, compare your random, because there'd always be somebody saying they're FBI anon, CIA anon, all that kind of stuff on these boards for decades. QAnon was totally different than this. Way they used imperatives, used questions, used cult-like techniques of how you would recognize this from talking to your cult people, Eric. The way QAnon defends itself is almost identical to the way cultists defend cult leaders. When Richard and I started criticizing this about 6 months, a year ago plus, some of it was private, but then we went public with it. We got all kinds of pushback, and people get upset. Well, you saw it.
Oh, I get pushback about you.
Yeah, you said that. The only thing that got you more pushback was the ultimate preacher for QAnon, Mr. Lynn Wood. When you had that little thing on Lynn Wood, the Lynn sanity came for. You know, he's still crazy and out there gibbering. Can you imagine? I mean, that's why the QAnon is a story from this would be more of an Allison thing than my thing, but as a story, it's fascinating. It's maybe the most successful psyop I've witnessed in modern American history. It convinced people like Lynn Wood to self-immolate, destroy their entire reputation and career, helped Sidney Powell destroy her career, help a well-respected general. Frankly, Flynn's career is done because of his affiliation with this stuff. Nobody in D.C. is going to touch him again. And so people that were and that's why I say, who profited from this? And you look at who profited from it, and that leads you to guess who QAnon was, and that suggests it probably wasn't the Philippine pig farmer that was behind it all.
Well, okay, so where I was leading is somebody had a super chat earlier. I've given up it. I can't keep up, but Rich, Robert, Allison, what are you getting back about the, shall we say, the future of the Republican Party? Is there a future? I mean, has populism died? Did it get blown up on itself? I mean, I it's a legit question. I definitely, want to know, what's going on. I personally feel like Trump may be dead. I don't know. I could be wrong though. You guys can fill me out.
Yeah, if you want to take this, Robert, go ahead. I actually just spent today walking around. Sometimes, poll, Robert knows, we poll on the phone, we'll poll online, but sometimes I want to go to face-to-face people in certain areas, bellwether areas. I'm a pain in the butt, but I do it well. So I want to bug you and find out and pick your brain. And talking to the heart of the Republican Party, which is no doubt a working, American, income really doesn't even, it's not, there's no neat box to put it in, but the heart of the Republican Party, it's amazing how the media portrays them, but they're actually very diverse. They're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, but they're workers, and asking their opinion, they don't want a new party. That's pretty general consensus. They want to cleanse. What's the word I'm looking for? They want to bring the party back to what it was. They view Donald Trump as somebody who was trying. And Robert, you and I talked about this a little bit on Monday. The America First, right? The working man and woman. That is the origin of the modern Republican Party, and Trumpism was bringing it back from the Bushites that really destroyed it. They left the party in shambles. The Republican Party as a national force was dead before Donald Trump. It was dying. It was dying a slow, cancerous death, and it was going to be painful to watch. He changed the map, the electoral map. And there's no other way to move forward. The people don't want to go back to Mitt Romney, and they don't want to go back to George W. Bush and the Lindsey Grahams. They view those people as, the anger is astonishing. When we were polling just last night, 37% of Republicans answered the question about whether or not they wanted to see Trump convicted, and then hung up the phone on us. That's how mad these people are right now. Robert, you're laughing because we already have a problem with response bias. Already, it's out of control. So people, I think there is no future without, I know Trump talks about a third party, but generally his voters, the heart of the Republican Party, they don't want a new party. They just want their party back. They understand they're in a fight for control of this thing. They get it. And they want to win it.
Okay. And I think, Karl Rove acknowledged this the other day. He said that there's clearly a civil war within the Republican Party between the professional class that runs it and the working class that are its voters. Yep. And I think that that won't change. And I think the first step will be populism isn't going anywhere. The question is populism as a political force isn't going to go anywhere. Where it ends up is the open question over the next decade. How much of it has a voice within the Republican Party? How much of it has a voice within the Democratic Party? And if both parties completely shut themselves out to it, then a third party will emerge from either the right or the left. That will probably be the most successful third party since the Republican Party itself was in the 1860s. I mean, it has, because one way or the other, the institutions are still not hearing the cry of the public. I was, before I hopped on here, I was on a live chat with Tulsi Gabbard, who's building up her own community like Richard is on, and like I am on Locals, Dave Rubin's thing. And it was fascinating to see the dialogue and the discussion and how much ideological overlap there is between your independent Trump supporter and the person that's your average Tulsi supporter on her board. So it shows that populism has they did a recent poll if America was a multi-party country, what it looked like. Well, it turns out about 75% of the representatives would represent populist parties of one shape or another. Only a quarter of the country is either neoliberal or neoconservative. But what it is 80% of the political consulting class is neoliberal or neoconservative. 80% of the institutional press, and maybe Allison can speak to this in part, as well, is either neoliberal or neoconservative. The ordinary working class person, and that's the problem, like what I witnessed happen to journalism over the past 20, 30 years. What was once a blue-collar kind of profession, or at least a very little d democratic profession, has become a very elite occupation. I mean, heck, you have to intern at places where you don't get paid anything. Only people who can afford to do that mostly are professional class kids. Most journalists, I mean, my niece, God bless her, she wants to go into it, but she's been protected and privileged most of her life. Whereas the blue collar people I know, my nephews and nieces, no interest in it whatsoever. And there's actually a guy that works for me in my law firm, was an old school journalist. I mean, he worked at every tiny little newspaper across the country over the last 35 years. Came to work with me because he can't get paid anything decent anywhere in a newspaper because they're all dying across America. Yeah. So I think populism is going to be the driving force in the West in the next decade or two, because there's going back to the interview Alison did, there's a unifying rally against globalism, whatever you call it, that the global elites have just sort of failed them. Macron is very unpopular in France. Merkel is finally leaving in Germany, where populist parties are surging. Populist parties surging in Austria, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Obviously, with Brexit actually succeeding in the UK. And we may see UKIP come back because of unhappiness about how the Tories are handling the lockdown. So populism is here to stay. The question is, where will its home be? And that's frankly an open question, because the institutional elites that control our biggest parties have no interest in hearing the populist cry of their own audience.
So, Alison, what are you seeing exactly on your side? I mean, you're in a unique place because you and your husband, I mean, he trains cops in one way, but you're also a journalist. You're in the Northwest, but you're not completely in Seattle. What are you seeing on the ground? We've talked a lot offline, so I mean, go at it seriously, because
I'm not completely in Seattle. I'm on the side of the state that wants to secede from Seattle, so I'm in a very different place. Washington is really interesting politically. They want to call this side Liberty State and just let Seattle and the west side of the Cascades just run themselves, which maybe is more to the point of what we're talking about here, because this side of the state is working class. It's farmers and just a lot of blue collar types, and the west side is known for tech and government work, and just the sort of more like that's where it costs a lot of money to live, right? Seattle's a very expensive place. Amazon's there. A guy that I had on my channel who's been covering a lot of the protests and riots was just in Seattle last night for the stuff that was going down, which I covered back in 2017, though it appears it's gotten worse. And they had spray painted guillotine Bezos on the Amazon building. So it's like, it's very interesting that it's not just, like Robert's saying, it's not just a political left-right thing. It really, there is such an economic component to it, a feeling that people are disenfranchised from the elites and that they're just done with it. And what's funny is, like, you were bringing up Tulsi Gabbard, and I remembered mentioning this article from CBS News back in this. So this was like January of last year when she was running. And the CBS article, the title is Tulsi Gabbard appeals to Trump voters. That may be an obstacle. And you're like, why would that be an obstacle if you want to win? Isn't that a good thing? But that's how the media covered a lot of the sort of outliers when, in the run-in, because like, instead of it being about an anti-Trump thing, you would have to understand what it was that she was offering, or like Andrew Yang was offering, that appealed to people that were on the right. And I feel like they're still missing that there is still this blindness to the fact that there are very similar complaints on either side. And like when you were talking about the conservative side or the Republican Party and kind of that divide. But as I pay attention to what's happening on the left, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. I mean, prior to Trump, there was a lot of shared disappointment in mainstream media. Then when Trump was elected, then it was like, okay, well, if you're a mainline Democrat, you're going to like the media again because they don't like this guy. But there was the populist left side, I guess, or I don't even totally know what to call them. They still were like, wait a second, we still don't really like you guys. And so I see some of the similar complaints too on that side, and similar disconnect. And, when now all of a sudden you have Republicans who are like, we want to end the wars, but you have mainline Democrats in media that are like cheering it on. It's just, it's a very weird time to be alive. And it's certainly a weird time to be in mainstream journalism. Obviously, I'm not in it anymore, but as you were mentioning, Robert, that on top of all of these ideological, turnovers and just the blurring of all these different lines, you also have an industry that is hiring younger and paying less. I had a friend who has been in the business for 20 years. She's a very talented journalist, and she was just promoted with a $20,000 pay cut. So they were like, thank you. We would like to promote you to main anchor, but also we're going to cut your salary by $20,000. She's like, huh? So the people who like have the historical knowledge, they can give you some context about what they're covering. They're in it for the right reasons. Those people are just kind of being sort of, slowly pushed out the door. I watched my own station give retirement buyouts probably 5 years ago or so, because those folks they wanted to get the people who are kind of in like the mid 50s range, and the higher salaries that, from 20 years ago or so, they wanted them out so that they could hire two people for that one salary. But people who really didn't have a whole lot of context, you're cycling through employees very quickly. Local news, unfortunately, is one of those places where if you have fewer people and you're covering more news because you have, more live broadcasts, which happened in 2008 during the recession, you're recycling talking points from the networks. And so if you're wondering, why does my local news station sound a lot like NBC or CBS? That's why, because they don't have, they're not there, first off. But even if, if they had the time, they just don't have the time. So they just, you get the AP or the Reuters, or you get your national affiliate, and you're just recycling national news. They're like, that's how that stuff kind of creeps in. Then on top of it, there is that echo chamber and the just similarity of background, the same colleges, the same people going out drinking together at bars, reading the same material, hanging out with the same people. And there's a cultural echo chamber about where we're at now, going from that historical perspective of like a middle class blue collar job to now something where you have people who have doctorates, who are, I have a doctor of journalism. I didn't study journalism, which is why when I first started, I made lots of mistakes that, the people in the industry were like, never do that again. But I also had no attachment to that way of.
That's why you have a soul.
I'm sure there are people with journalism degrees that have souls, but it's just to say that I didn't know the rules, if that makes sense. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the cultural norms. And so I never was that way, simply because I was a history major and studied French as well. And so I lived abroad, and I also rode horses. And so that being kind of a farm girl, I think affected me too, because I knew people that, kind of lived outside of cities. That's the other problem. I saw a friend of mine still in the industry back during the election had tweeted something about how many of the the cities went for Biden, and the small towns went for Trump, and just the divide between small town and rural America versus, the big cities. And so then I wrote him back, and I was like, well, what does that say about journalists who are incentivized in their career to move up to bigger and bigger cities, to the point where like you may spend 8 months to a year or maybe a couple years in your first job making $18,000 a year in a small town. But if you want to make it through, you're going to end up in New York City or LA or someplace where you're totally disconnected from, that cattle drive in Central Washington that I used to go on a regular basis as an environmental reporter. There's a whole slew of problems, which is in part why I started my channel, because on one hand, people have these, not that there isn't like a deep state to be discussed when you get to the highest levels of what's happening in corporate media. But to me, the more dangerous and the more consistent problem is what I've talked about. No time, echo chambers, same cultural backgrounds, homogeneity of ideology, all of that. That stuff to me is far more problematic. You could cast an entire news team that looks very different, but they all think the same. And I think, unfortunately, we're at that point.
I'm going to jump around a little bit. I know this is affected. Alison actually came on, I don't know, some Saturday ago. I can't even remember days. They all run together, where I just kind of went off about the whole Parler situation with, what was going on, everything else. And somebody has a super chat. It looks to me like Parler's gone, which I kind of predicted Parler is gone. I mean, maybe they'll pull something out, but I just don't see them going any further. Alison, what are your thoughts on that? And then Rich and on, essentially the judge kind of just said, Yeah, no temporary restraining order, I guess you'd call
Well,
it. And screw you, didn't prove anything.
Well, it was the judge's ruling was a disgrace. I only knew that the judge was a Carter appointee. I did not know it was a liberal woman from New York who went to college in the 60s in the Ivy League. You combine that, all you need to know, sadly enough, is that life experience. And you've just described the demographic that when Richard does a poll of who hates Donald Trump and Trump supporters, that's your classic archetype demographic. Professional class, post-college degree, with some power and influence from who's only lived in urban metropolitan areas, self-identifies as liberal ideologue. So her opinion was a disgrace, frankly. She even made arguments about Amazon that Amazon didn't even have the guts to make in Amazon's favor. There's a chance it gets overturned if they got lucky with the Ninth Circuit draw. Because some of her, but it's amazing. Basically, Amazon's argument was a political argument. It wasn't a legal argument. And it said, Judge, just pretend the contract isn't what the contract is, and the law isn't what the law is, and the facts are what the facts are not, because we're on the right side of the politics, and Donald Trump is horrible. And she goes on at length talking about, she cited a news article that turned out to be wrong as her evidence. It's like it's been during the whole Trump era, the rules of evidence have gone out the door if the politics fits, so on and so forth. So it's a sad, disgraceful event. Parler still may come back. They're using Gab's the connections to rebuild and restructure their architecture. And though Gab may be the ultimate winner, which I'm sure the Gab guy will be laughing about for a while. I've known him for years. Nice enough guy. The problem is, you've been on Gab, Eric. It's a little bit. Let's just say it needs some improvement in its interactivity, and they do have all the annoying trolls on there. That's why it's like they really do have some odious folks. Truthfully, yes. And I'm all for free speech. God bless them. But now of course Twitter got sued today, by the way, because it turned out they had child pornography up that they left up deliberately. Said somehow it didn't violate their terms of service. And it fits into revenge porn, which actually Twitter has been a common tool for distribution of revenge porn, particularly revenge porn, even though revenge porn is against the law in California where Twitter is based, including revenge porn in particular that targeted conservatives. People forget Christine O'Donnell ran for the Senate in Delaware, I think it was 2010 as a Tea Party candidate.
2010.
Gawker released nude photos of her as political payback. And they said it was justified because now based on that her ex, it was revenge porn is what it was, but it was double revenge porn of her ex that was facilitated by Gawker because they didn't like her politics. So, it's ironic to see these people, now that this judge say, we in the name of Amazon's honor and integrity and its morality, we cannot allow them to have to put parlays up. These people, of course, she's a Carter appointee, so that tells you how politically savvy she is in the world. Maybe she follows her kids' woke, Instagram or grandkids or whatever. But that's another story for another day. But I think but what Alison says about journalism is absolutely critical. There's not even good local journalists, as Richard can tell you. The first great pollsters were local journalists in places like Chicago who would do straw polls amongst their local working class communities and constituents, because the journalist that worked in town knew every community in town. They knew who to go to and their polls are a lot more accurate than the institutional polls that they put out in 2016 and 2020, as Richard can tell you.
Yeah, and Robert, too, with what you were saying with that, I mean, really, it's that professional class. All of it's out the window. Law, norms, and I mean, we've seen it from national, the way national elected figures acted to local judges. And we poll it. You can see it. It's a fanatical hatred of this guy and what he stands for. And because I don't want to say this the wrong way, but they think they're doing something virtuous. So if you think somebody's evil, or you really believe Donald Trump is a Nazi and Parler helps him convey his Hitler-esque message, then you're not doing anything wrong when you break the law, or you ignore the law, or you rewrite a law, when you legislate from the bench, when you impeach him without hearings, when you hand in votes that were not match signatures. You're not doing anything wrong. You're the virtuous one. You're actually not, you're thinking beyond the importance of preserving these norms and the rule of law. You're smarter than that, and you know it. Nobody else can see it, but you can, and a select few, and you're actually doing a virtuous act. So it's really a twisted way of thinking that is how a judge can know, the law. I mean, we can honestly say when the Ninth Circuit ruled the way it did early in this man's administration, they know what the law says. They know the Supreme Court was going to say that ban, that travel restriction, was squarely within presidential authority. That is exactly what the Supreme Court wrote back to them. In other words, don't send us this crap again. It's in black and white. And yet they kept doing it. And a judge in Hawaii followed suit because they think they're doing something that's virtuous. So it's like the hell with everything else. It's really.
I have no doubt that judge walked out of the court up there in Washington yesterday or today, that she heard Ed Leonard Cohen's "Hallelujah" in the background. She was, the truth was marching on. It's very much that mindset. But it's key. What Alison points out is that it's this professional class mindset that's overlapped with safe space culture, what Jonathan Haidt talks about. That, the kidnapping scares also put up. That was back when journalism's problem was, if it bleeds, it leads. If it scares, put it on the front page. And they did the whole, maybe your child's play center is actually filled with satanic pedophiles.
Satanic Panic. Satanic Panic. I had Ken Lanning on about that.
Exactly. And Haidt makes an intriguing argument. I think I saw it on Rogan, where he argued that created the beginnings of safe space society.
With Tipper Gore, it kind of did tie in with Tipper Gore. I don't know if you remember the parental advisory lyrics.
And that was not from her after Al jettisoned her for his masseuse friends and other things. That's another story about Al, but I'll say for another day. Had some friends who helped run Al's campaign because we're from the same state. He lost, by
the way, didn't he?
Say again?
Didn't he lose that state?
Yes, he did lose Tennessee. He made up that fake story about tobacco. Everybody, I had respect for the old man.
Well, and the internet too.
Voted against Vietnam, played the fiddle, had let his hair grow out towards the end of his voted. Ultimately, supported civil rights at the end. He made a lot of good, bold decisions. Al's mom was was Junior, you're going to be president, all that kind of stuff. A little over the top, a little bit of a Foucault upbringing kind of thing. It's like when you read Michel Foucault, figure out, man, this guy's mother was, watching him all the time when he was 3, or at least he thought she was, because there's going to be some to sit there and have brilliant insights, but the government's always watching you. There's probably something sneaky.
I cannot believe we got Foucault in here. I cannot believe why not? Barnes just snuck in postmodernism. Oh my God.
Brilliant. Well, I was thinking of it today, Foucault, because our male, female, transgender identity, whatever, from Pennsylvania, who's going to be recommended now for the Biden cabinet.
You mean the one that took is it they? I don't know.
Well,
the individual whose mother was removed from the nursing home while everyone else was being sent back.
Exactly. Well, by the way,
that'll get you thrown off Twitter. Trust me.
Now getting the pronoun wrong is going to be beyond just.
That's why I didn't. Individual works for me.
What you're going to recommend is something right out of Foucault, which Foucault used to say he was obsessed with what gives anybody the power to declare somebody else insane. And what if the insane people got to define sanity? It was a lot of intriguing intellectual subjects. He went through the history of the treatment of the mentally ill, how our treatment of criminals has been totally different over time, over different societies. And what is it? And that often our prison systems will be a greater reflection of the society than they will the people that they're trying to imprison. And the same with how we treat mental illness. Well, it's been a fear that they will label politically dissonant ideas a sign of a mental disease that requires mental treatment.
Well, they actually are. That's happening right now.
Yeah,
I would argue. I mean, Alison, you've seen that because you've talked about people writing in your forums. What can you discuss that a little bit?
Well, just like you see articles with headlines that talk about people and their dissociation from reality, and that has been used to argue for why we should have more deplatforming and suppression of information. So instead of just having bad ideas or hateful ideas, which is what it used to be, you're promoting hate speech or dangerous ideas. Now you're just dissociated from reality. To me, that is teeing up exactly what you're talking about, that you're just living in some kind of la la land. And the only way to bring you back to yourself is to put you in this, lockdown, padded room situation of internet jail, I guess. So I believe that's already happening. Say that again.
How is that different than Mao re-education camp?
Yep.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's fascinating. Like when I was looking up how that COVID whistleblower in China was sentenced, and the arguments that, and who knows, I don't know if the translation was perfect, but the arguments that the lawyer was saying that the government made against her was like exactly what you hear. She was like causing trouble and spreading disinformation. It's crazy. And you're like, well, no, she's going to jail for exactly that, for causing trouble and making the government look bad. And you're like, where have I heard that before? So I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Obviously, I don't know if that would ever really get to that point, but I think it's unfortunate. And from the law perspective, I'm actually curious because depending on where the lawyer comes from, like their background, I get different opinions. Like, Eric, I had the internet law expert who had a totally pro Silicon Valley, do whatever they want perspective. Basically,
we're trying to set them up with Barnes, by the way. So behind the scenes, because
that would be awesome.
We think there may be some fireworks with it.
Oh, I'd love to see that because yes, right. And then I have a constitutional law guy, and he's like, no. And so, silly me. And I should have known this, I guess, being in journalism, that people are people. But I used to look at law or science as if it was like, that's the law. And you it's like a definitive thing. It's not just something that, I had breakfast, outside today, so I'm a little cold, so I'm going to interpret it this way versus I'm in New Jersey and, outside of New York City, so I have a different opinion. Like that, you could just interpret it so wildly differently. And that is what I literally, and I don't know if that's reflective of where a lot of people are now, where we're just so disillusioned. Maybe it's because I'm millennial. I don't know. But I'm at that point where I just really like,
oh my God. Everyone I know that's cool is like, no, I'm on the cusp. I consider myself
I am on the cusp.
There we go. I was waiting.
But, this brings me back kind of to a point with the media as well, which is to kind of go back to how does a group like QAnon get people on board? And I really saw over the last year or two the march towards the end of the plank with what truth is anyway, because people just don't trust like your average institutional journalist anymore. They feel so lied to that it makes you paranoid and you're just ready to grab onto something crazy to try to make sense of things. And that was my plea to my industry a year or two ago, was like, you may think that your aggressive gotcha journalism under the Trump administration is taking us to a good place, but I actually see this very dangerous place that we ended up in, which is we don't trust anybody anymore unless they're our group. And some of those groups are dangerous, but we're going to believe them because they're our person. And we're not going to believe anybody on the outside, even if they say something important, because we just don't trust them anymore. And so I remember literally saying on my channel back in like August, this is going to get us to a point where we're really going to need to be able to look at the American people and say, hey, like, pay attention. This is a really big deal. And they're not going to listen to you anymore because you've cried wolf over and over and over and over again. And they're just going to be paranoid and totally disenchanted and no one's going to listen. And here we are. So what did those 4 years of just constant hysteria and hate over and over and over and over again, like what did that get us?
It got the best speech that Chris Wallace has ever heard since 1961.
Yeah. The guy that wrote Listen Liberal, I was just listening to him talking about that on the Rolling Stone podcast with Katie Halper and Matt Taibbi. And you should go listen to that if you're interested in it, because he had a totally different perspective. So, it's fascinating. Like, again, we're at that world where somebody center right likes it, but somebody who's on the working class left hates it. And it's just a weird place. It's a very weird place to be.
It reminds me a lot, and Richard will recognize the reference. I refer to Biden as his fraudulency the second, in honor of Rutherford B. Hayes, who was his fraudulency the first. But that's almost the only example I can think of historically for someone like Biden. Like when I was looking at this from a betting perspective, I was like, aside from the anomalies of Trump and the anomalies of a lockdown politics and economics, it was almost impossible or inconceivable to see Biden as president, just because there was no real historical example of someone like him, a careerist in the Senate, He'd been mostly mediocre throughout his political career. Rejected. I mean, the only guy to ever get elected president, rejected not once, not twice, but 3 different times by the first states to look at him up close and personal. Iowa, New Hampshire said no.
He's also the first defense attorney. So that he's crazy.
Look, I'll give Dershowitz credit. You know, he's reaching for anything that he can argue to Biden to try to be influential in the Biden world. So, you know, I'll give the good professor. But as I said at the end, there's a reason why Joe Biden is familiar with criminal law, and it's not from his criminal defense days. But that's another story for another day. So
no, it's from his academic prowess.
Yes, of course. Well, you know, I always give him credit. I mean, he knew how to steal from day one. He proved that very early on. He knew how to cheat and steal. So he proved his pedigree as a politician from a very young age. But the closest we've had to anything like this is the kind of people we had at the end of the 19th century. Hayes probably the most like that. A lot of people around Grant were this way. Grant himself wasn't, but a lot of people around him were. And you could argue some other people that were mixed into that group towards the end of and that's also an era when politics kind of got crazy for a while, because you had populism arising on the left and the right, urban and rural, different places, different reasons. You could kind of look at like Horace Greeley and see aspects of Bernie Sanders in overlap with his politics, obviously with not only Bryan, but the People's Party, the Greenback Party, the farmer labor movement. You have overlaps of both Trumpism and Bernie Sanders supporters. So, you know, we've been through an era now since 1992 where we've had major third-party candidates of some form on the ballot in almost every election, aside from a few. And as you had Perot twice, then you had Nader in 2000, then they had to go to great lengths to diminish him in 2004. Then you had the Libertarians and the Greens in 2016. Libertarians end up being the decisive margin in this cycle.
Sure were.
I mean, yeah, as Richard can tell you, if the Greens had been on the Greens and Kanye had been on the ballot in a bunch of states,
Biden would have lost regardless. Yep,
exactly.
He would have lost even with the mail-in.
Correct. And if the Libertarians had not been on the ballot, then Biden loses. So, but that tells you that something is deeply frayed. I mean, we just had an inauguration that was the least attended in history that looked like a military-occupied capital. Something is clearly amiss.
Well, Rich, actually on that note, do you actually see it to where we could ever be at a point? I mean, I'm not opposed to having 3 or 4 solid parties like in Israel or Canada or England, where the parties have to get together and ultimately team up in order to pull off a majority. Do you guys see that here? I know that they want to have that 50% or more at any point, but is there room for a permanent third party that's a legitimate contender?
Well, that's the problem the Libertarians have had and the Greens have had, you know, for all of these years, that really the other two have been united in their effort to keep them a minimal minority party. If the two major parties weaken, we see one obviously right now, I think it's very clear it's going to weaken before it gets stronger again. You know, sometimes the best thing for a party is to lose, and you may see a powerful Republican Party come back that is loyal and doesn't betray their principles, which is what we have seen happen. And sometimes the best thing for a party like that is defeat. It really does depend a lot on what Robert was saying in the earlier segment, which is populism is here. And it really depends on who's going to make a home for it. And we're focused right now on the Republican Party, but I would submit the Democratic Party has a dangerous future ahead. And it looks strong right now because we never focus on the winner. But they can't keep this hodgepodge together. Let's be real here. They have all of these wings merged together, neoliberal warmongers, the ACLU with people who will will sleep under your bed to get dirty information on you. You know, I mean, they cannot keep this together. AOC with Joe Biden. Let's be real. Joe Biden has been K Street's best friend for 4 decades. The man has done the bidding of K Street forever. They have people like Tulsi, yet they have a president who's loyal to the Chinese interests. I mean, this can't stay together. So we're focused right now on Republicans because they're the loser always gets the autopsy, right? But I would submit that there probably is. I don't think a bicameral party system can survive forever, especially when those parties are not listening to the voices of those they want to populate their party or want to vote on the ballot. You have to listen to people eventually, Eric. And they're at a point now. One party is at a point where they're about to crack from being betrayed so much. The other party is still nostalgia, right? They're still that their win is fresh, but they're going to realize soon that Donald Trump isn't around anymore. And where is all this loathing and hatred going to go? All right. I mean, where are they going to place all of it? Those professional class people are going to have to blame somebody else really soon. Barack Obama was very good at this. So every time there was a big problem and Democrats would start to look at each other, Barack Obama would just give a couple of minutes speech and say, George W. Bush. He was great at it. And I would laugh because I knew what he was doing. He was directing dissent to somebody else that they hated much more than his recent failure, whatever it may have been that he did wrong. He was brilliant. I mean, Barack, but only Obama, I think, is somebody that can get away with that. Joe Biden is not the kind of person. Look, there's a reason why he lost Iowa and New Hampshire. You have to be up close to people. You have to be personable. We never polled Joe Biden's favorability rating above 47% nationally. Even go look at the Epoch Times poll that we did. The poll we did for the Epoch Times. We called him the great unremarkable. There were all these people who were going to vote for him only because his name was not Donald Trump.
Right,
and
so
by the
nobody
way,
voted for Biden is what I keep saying.
Yeah,
Nobody
I mean,
voted for him. It was either they voted against Trump or for Trump.
That's right. And Eric, by the way, he's the first and only candidate in history to be polled on that and win. Any other election where we have data, if you said you were voting for somebody, Donald Trump's voters, 80 to 90%. I'm voting for Donald Trump. That guy always wins. Always. In any election where you have data on it, you'll see. George Bush, he had people who loved him. John Kerry had people who were voting for him because he was not John Kerry. Mitt Romney, his voters hated Barack Obama. They didn't love Mitt Romney. He lost. Kerry lost. I mean, we have tons of these examples. John McCain, by the way, is another one. But I'd submit it really didn't matter what McCain did. He was done anyway.
Yeah, it was the magic mail-in ballots that carried old Joe across the finish line. But the way I look at it is this: we have a culture.
Don't show up to inaugurations, Robert.
I mean, they didn't even fill the seats that they put out. I mean, that's bad.
The lights, I mean, this is where our media is now. Chris Wallace, I mean, he's tingling. The lights remind me of Joe Biden's arms embracing America.
Across America. The other thing is, I think we'll see more, it was more understandable during Obama that the new professional class that dominated the media just loved the guy.
Sure.
It now will look more partisan when they pretend Joe Biden is Barack Obama. They're already pretending that Jill is just oh, look at that beautiful fashion statement she made walking into the White House.
Nothing like Kamala, though. I'm sorry. Those Chuck Taylors are sexy.
Oh, yes. Well, there were some other references that Kamala made, but I'll skip those. Family audience, what she recommended people wear to the inauguration. But yeah, I mean, I think, but all of it. I mean, then the purple coat was extraordinary and how hipster it was. And look at Michelle Obama. Especially to do this after 4 years of having an actual model in the White House, fashion model in the White House, and pretending she dressed poorly. Now we're going to pretend Jill Biden is some sort of Vogue cover girl. Okay. So it's going to be so over the top that the gaslighting it's already quit working to a large degree. But I think the gaslighting is just going to continue to collapse, and we'll see how it goes. And I was curious what Alison thinks. If you're in the journalism field, Trump was a ratings boom. What happens when you don't have Trump anymore? And what happens if those ratings start really collapsing? Because they're on the verge of collapsing before arguably Trump salvaged them for 4 years.
Everybody that I've been listening to is asking the same question, and nobody really has an answer for that, other than and I agree, feel that it's going to be very hard to walk this back. Going from the world is ending, the world is ending, the world is ending to everything is fine is probably not going to work from a business standpoint. So how else will the world end? Maybe they're secretly hoping Trump starts his own news network so that they can, Brian Stelter can talk about it. I'm not totally sure. I just think that, there's no way that this just takes a hard stop and goes back to what it was like 5 or 6 years ago, which wasn't even that great anyway, but it wasn't what we're at now. I think, but I don't know. Everybody's asking that question. I'm excited to see, honestly. I'm fascinated to see where we go.
Do you see this being the Pepsi challenge, Allison? Like, whenever you look at the Pepsi challenge, I have a great friend, Chris Lockhead. He's a marketing guy, and he goes insane. He's like, you don't do the Pepsi challenge, you freaking morons. He goes, anytime you talk about this stuff, what's in people's minds? Coke. So I'm wondering if all the press coverage will be Biden is doing blah, 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 because Trump never would. Any way to keep him in the conversation. Do you see that possibly happening as a way to keep it going?
To keep Trump in the conversation?
Right, to keep the ratings up. Like, keep attacking him via, it's like you can't really praise anything. So you could try to trash and say, see how mature Biden is versus, and then bring up footage of Trump or whatever, even though he's not there.
Well, yeah. And there could also be this sort of archetype of what Trump is and kind of attacking that. So, all right, so let's take COVID for an example. If we're going to start reporting on COVID, we could turn that into look at these states that aren't locking down, or look at these people that don't wear masks, or like I'm working on an interview right now with a church that's racked up gazillions of dollars in fines in California, so we can shame them. So I think you can find kind of Trump shadows, right? Because didn't a lot of people often say that there was like Trump himself that was disdainful to that mainstream corporate national media scene, but there was also what he represented in a lot of ways Sure. Yeah, exactly. And just the way he talked and his personality and all that stuff. And so you can still find those things and you can still whip up a news story with those things. So I guess my prediction is we'll see that kind of stuff. We'll still see divisiveness and hysteria and finger pointing, but it'll live kind of as a, the legacy of what he represented that was so reprehensible to people. That'll now be the scapegoat.
And, my guess would be if Trump, if they're unable to sustain things without Trump staying front and center at some level, then that'll be the time for a foreign enemy to be scared and
or a domestic enemy too. I mean, that's what a lot of people are talking about now. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be the insurrection. But then you almost need, it turned out the Capitol Hill insurrection. Their problem was they couldn't get past the visuals of Buffalo Boy, and so it was always hard to be terrified of these people because it kept, it's the blue collar guy from Arkansas putting his feet on Pelosi's desk. That doesn't really, and that doesn't scare people. That triggers laughter, and definitely Buffalo Boy. Nobody looks at Buffalo Boy with his little Vikings outfit or whatever the heck that thing was. People tell me it's not a Vikings helmet; it's a Buffalo helmet. Okay, whatever it is, it's not someone I look at and go, "Oh, this is Timmy McVeigh, 1995." I look at that and think, "Man, that is funny." It's Michael Malice's view. Yeah. Malice's view, to go back to him, was he goes, "When you have something like that in your nation's capital, the cathedral no longer has the respect of the institution anymore.
Right.
It's a crock. It's a joke."
Well, and think about the video that was circulating that the NBC reporter took of those folks, breaking the cameras and dumping water on the equipment and stuff. And you don't hear them say, God, could we have done something that, made people hate us so much? Like, I don't know. No, you just never hear that. It's just, we're here to tell you the truth. Why can't you see it? I saw a local news director do a whole video. Comes out of the office addressing the public. I know. And it's just, it makes me want to rip my hair out because it's like, dude, stop. Stop the whole like, we are the bearers of truth. And if you don't get it, you're just too stupid, or you don't understand that we're here to save you from yourself. So just trust us, no sense of accountability, no sense that we made tons of money off of you guys and your fear and this guy and all this stuff for years. And now we're just like, you're the crazy ones. We created this, but you're the crazy ones. Like, that's the thing that drives me the most crazy. And is just like, can't we just at least, I'm not saying that people are responsible for their own actions. So I would never say that bad journalism drove people like they're like you do what you do, that's your choice. At the same time though, like we're never going to regain a footing with the public if we don't start looking at how we helped get this country to where it's at right now. Like we have to do that if we want to restore journalism at all.
And the political class is just like that, Allison. They're just like that. I just the other day was talking to a McConnellite, and I said, "You're talking about impeachment. What you're not understanding, what you're not acknowledging, is that Donald Trump was easy. It was easy for him to take over your party before 4 years ago because you failed so badly.
Mhm.
You did not hear their voices. You didn't listen to them. Very with the mentality you were just talking about, very condescending, and just show up and vote for us no matter what, even if we don't keep our promises, because the Democrats are worse. I mean, you can only
Well, it's like what the Democrats do with the blacks. Just show up. And that's why they lost some ground. This one,
I agree.
This one came in and it's just so outlandish, and I've got to get it out there.
Laura.
It wasn't from her, but somebody asked her. Ask Barnes what he thinks of Joe Rogan promoting the suggestion that Trump run for Florida Congress tomorrow and compete for Speaker of the House in 2024, I'm guessing.
No, 2022. The idea was that, and then he takes over the House. We get enough House and Senate seats. They impeach both Biden and Harris, and Trump steps in as the presidency for the Speaker of the House position. It's fun. It's fun stuff. It's not going anywhere.
No, I hope not.
Trump has no interest in trying to. Trump's not he's not a House of Cards guy. He's not Kevin Spacey's character. In fact, arguably one of Trump's great weaknesses was that his business negotiation skills, his marketing genius, did not translate at all to political negotiation on the Hill. I mean, as Richard can tell you, for the last 4 years, one of the great weaknesses of Trump was he got rolled by McConnell and Ryan all the time. And
is that because he's not a detail guy? He's like, good. I mean, I get these people. Don't worry about the little fiddly stuff. I don't care about that.
But so he chose to delegate to.
World. He assumed it was like the business world where you can get these guys and girls in a room and people keep their word, even though it's cutthroat. He didn't understand, and really kind of shocking because he dealt with politicians his entire life. He just didn't see the other side of the curtain, right? He didn't understand these people are liars and they have no character. I don't know how else to tell this people, but they'll backstab you.
His ego blinded him too.
Yeah, that's
kept believing that.
That's fair.
That, I'll step in the room. I'll convince all these people. They'll realize I'm the savior for their party. I'm the one that they can get them votes. I'm the one that can take the leadership. They'll realize that my ideas about war and trade just make more sense, both politically and otherwise. It was like when he's arguing with Paul Ryan about let's not cut Social Security. He's like, that's just really unpopular, probably. Just telling you, but he thought he could delegate to them. And that would work, that they would reward him, that they would reciprocate. It's why he kept doing interviews with the New York Times.
Yeah.
The most prescient book about Trump was Pat Buchanan's book about working for Nixon that he released a couple of years ago. Where he talked about Nixon's obsession with the press, Nixon's that he was focused on the institutional press, Nixon's failure to recognize that personnel was policy, and that most of the people he was picking for personnel were undermining at least the populist wing. And that was the first time the populist wing had really taken over the Republican Party in the post-war era, was Nixon 68. Because Eisenhower was much more
of that the Southern strategy that they like to call it?
That's what it was identified as, because they wanted to pigeonhole Kevin Phillips as being about race, when that isn't what Phillips' argument in the emerging Republican majority was. He was talking writ large that when the Yankee elites go one way, the whole rest of the working class middle America goes the other way. That's what he was talking about, for which race was simply a proxy. And the key to understand Phillips is his understanding of politics was from New York City. So he understood ethnic conflict. So to him, the idea that the Italians are against the Irish or against the Hasidic Jews or against the Brooklyn, everybody's against each other for their peace. The way, people like is how he filtered the world. And how he understood it. But his books and his theory was much bigger than Southern strategy, but it got pigeonholed as the Southern strategy. Phillips didn't mind because it promoted his book. Because the media, desiring to bash Nixon, had to keep talking about Kevin Phillips' book, Emerging Republican Majority, to put him on the political landscape, on the political map. But the most genius populist if people want to see a lot of predictors of what we're kind of going through all of Philip's books, you could sort of start in reverse. His last book was 1775, which is about the beginning of the country. Go all the way through to his most recent books, Bad Money, for example. I think it was 2012, 2013, or well, maybe 2010. But and you'll really get a sense of American politics from a populist perspective. The way I would describe it is our culture and political scene is like 1968, but our political parties are like 1962. And that's just a huge mismatch. You have a neoliberal Democratic Party running a party really driven by coalitions, minority coalitions and minorities and millennials, principally, who are rebelling against the system or very unhappy with the system, as the case may be. And you have a Republican Party that still is heavily dominated by, back then it was the Rockefeller wing, with the George Romney wing, institutionally, but the party had already moved on to a young Governor Reagan style future of politics, but it was not being picked up on at all. I mean, nobody saw Goldwater coming in 64. They thought the rejection of Goldwater, they want to reject Trump the way they think they rejected Goldwater. But what it turned out was the guy who campaigned with Goldwater was the only guy who had a shot in 1968. Nixon campaigned everywhere, barnstormed for Goldwater, knew he had no chance. But he knew that the only way he had a chance was if he was by Goldwater's side, because the party's coalitions were shifting. Institutional Republicans have no clue. I mean, I was down there in the room right after the election with all the big Georgia political bigwigs. Richard had conversations with a wide range of them across the country. They were, and that was the first sign I didn't realize how clueless they were. Even though we've been talking about it for 4 years, to see it up front and personal was just, they really believe if they could just purge the party of Trump and Trumpism, that they would be back to a 2014 majority, that they only lost the 2012 election because it was Obama, and that they would have the presidency tomorrow. They would have the Senate tomorrow. They would have the House tomorrow. They still don't believe, they're still, Mitch McConnell thinks that convicting Trump would be a good thing for the Republican Party. That's how completely out of touch he is. He has no clue at all. It's a very much a let them eat cake culture that took Trump for a ride on domestic policy that hurt Trump ultimately. But the greater danger is that they don't understand their own audience. And I don't think the neoliberals with Biden do either. They don't. That's why Antifa, the only violence we had on Inauguration Day was Antifa on the left in Portland and in Seattle, not far from Allison. So that's what they're doing, the guillotine Bezos. They're never going away. If people understood Antifa and their history and the Black Bloc,
they can't put that back in the bottle. They cannot put that back in the bottle. They let it out.
Joe Biden. Going to Allison's point, they have no interest in the Biden administration, no interest in any, nor does BLM. Like I said, it's like 1968. I mean, that's when the left came to Chicago and the great Chicago 7 trial that's being portrayed on Netflix, which may be the Capitol Hill insurrection, the Buffalo Bill sitting on the Senate thing, holding the mighty gavel. I mean, that's what horrified them. What horrified them was burning down streets didn't horrify them. Destroying small businesses didn't horrify them. But my God, you're on the speaker's gavel? The speaker's gavel? The arrogance of this clerical class. That's all it's missing is, the robes and the little white thing right here to tell us all that they are better than us. And they're shocked that the ordinary person is like, nah, we don't really care about you at all. That's what terrified them about the Capitol Hill riots. It wasn't the right's willingness to use violence or some part of them. It's that they didn't respect them. It reminds me when I was in law school, and it was a second year as part of a clerkship program. And I remember this guy looking at me that ran this clerical program, and they wanted me to basically sell out someone I thought was innocent, and I had no interest in it. And I remember him finally, and he was an old school lefty of all things, and he looked at me and he finally was like, "Oh my God, you have no respect for authority." And I was like, yeah. So it's that same recognition that Washington had. That's why they brought out the military. They're like, you better respect their authority because we have 30,000 guards sitting out here. That's what terrifies them, is that the peasants don't care. The peasants are not going to curtsy when their carriage comes through the community next time.
That's the scariest thing for any government, Robert, is when they realize they've lost their credibility. That is the scariest moment for any government, whether you're a third world country trying to create a new regime or you are a 200-plus-year-old, a self-governing society. The moment it hits you that you no longer have regime credibility, you get scared and you turn the Capitol into a military junta. That's what we're seeing right now. Everyone should not mistake that. They were terrified, including the likes of Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham. These people are the biggest frauds in the Capitol. Not to just take pot shots at them, but you mentioned it before, talking about the people that really believe it would, if they could just purge Trumpism, they'll move back into the 2004 George W. Bush coalition. And they never can answer one simple question, which is, which state was Jeb Bush going to win in the Rust Belt? Your map is going to go back to 2012. Mitt Romney lost Virginia to Barack Obama. It's gone. So which state in the Rust Belt is Tim Scott going to take from the next Democratic nominee? It's not going to happen. Can't answer it, but that's what they believe.
Actually, that goes back to a source reference that Allison made to Thomas Frank, who one of his original books was What's Wrong with Kansas? And part of that was sort of from a left populist perspective, why has the left lost a big part of the populist wing? But he describes in there the beginning of the collapse of conservative populism for the Bushite majority in 05 and 06, where you had a bunch of folks in Kansas wanting nothing to do with Bush-style republicanism. And the Republican Party never came to terms with that because they snuck through McCain, snuck through Romney. And so they thought Trump was just a intermediary interloper who, because of his money and his unique marketing skill, convinced a bunch of people to believe things. Like the media, I think a large part of the media really thinks, and maybe Allison can answer this question, that the only reason why they're not being respected as the gatekeepers of truth is their God-given authority and their credentialed right to give us, is in large part they blame on Trump. And they realize Trump was just reflecting what was happening in the world. He didn't create it.
Well, we've got I know Allison has a hard out.
Well, no, I was just on that point. I think it allowed sort of the delusion to continue a little bit longer in the field, because now you could say, like, this guy just lied to all these people, or he's made them think we're their enemy, and it's just not true. I believe that in some cases it probably is aggravated, or maybe given license to be more vocal about it, but I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form just started with him. And honestly, as somebody who has covered the protests and riots in Seattle, there are a lot of people that have hated the media for a long time. I know I've said this before, but we were not necessarily like the most beloved people when we were at the other side's events either. And so to me, it's unfortunate because we had an opportunity. Like there was a doctor I was talking to one time about the 2008 recession and then the bank bailouts and all this stuff. And he it's interesting that a doctor looks at this kind of stuff, but he is all about kind of simplifying your life and trying to find health right without all this stuff around us. And Zach Bush, if anybody's heard of him, he's a really interesting guy. But he was talking about how, like, unfortunate was that we didn't necessarily, some of us, not everybody, but like some of us didn't necessarily learn our lesson about maybe we don't need everything that we think. Maybe we don't need lots of debt. Maybe we don't need 6 rooms in our house. Maybe we need a simpler life is an okay thing. And I feel like we had an opportunity for a reckoning as well in journalism, but we missed it. And we just blamed it on Trump. We just blamed it on, he made people hate us. And now, like, I see journalists talking about how, well, now we're going to start restoring it because he's gone, or like we can finally, like, be at ease at press conferences now. We can feel like which is troubling to me, that you would now feel like now you can breathe a sigh of relief at a presidential press conference. Like, shouldn't that have always been the place where you were holding people accountable? The White House Correspondents' Dinner has always been this very weird phenomenon to me. Like, why do we have this? Like, why do journalists go drinking with the politicians and the elite on a regular basis? Like, everybody was mad in the journal, like, Trump's not going to come. We're not going to have this. Like, why do you guys have this anyway? I've always thought this was a really weird thing. And so the reckoning didn't come. And I think it's just going to keep getting worse. And I think that video that we were talking about with the folks stomping and breaking the equipment and stuff, it's just that to me is going to continue. Trump was not like I said, he may have played a part in giving license to be more aggressive, I guess, but the underlying tone of just distrust and disillusionment with corporate journalism, that was there before him.
Well,
Exactly. And I think it's gonna. Well, I've been polling this for years too. I don't see the media's perception of credibility or integrity as a respected gatekeeper going up anytime soon.
No, I think that like I just saw somebody do. I think with Tim Pool, somebody did a video about how the numbers are just getting worse. So I'm glad I'm on YouTube. I get well until they kick me off.
Yeah, right. I've gotten those emails too. I don't know if you've got them yet, but I've got them. No more talk about election integrity. And look, I'm going to say what I'm going to say. You can keep me on there if you want. I mean, that's it. I'm not going to tell me what I can and can't say as long as I'm not citing some kind of like, there is a line, but just talking about information. I have I don't know if you have to go, Allison, but I had a question maybe you can answer, which is, when did that start, that like incestuous relationship with the media? We almost never got the Pentagon Papers because of it. They didn't want to release them, damage McNamara and all the other cabinet members in the former administration. And I've actually heard the old editor of the Washington Post, what's his name, Bill Brady? Was it
Ben Bradley?
Ben Bradley, thank you. And he said, the things that they left out of the newspaper during the Johnson administration, the women, Robert, all of the stuff they left out of the paper. When did this incestuous relationship start? Because it's not, that's contrary to their entire point for existing.
I don't know I don't know the long-term answer on that one, but I will say that like talking to like the constitutional attorney that I've had on my channel a couple of times about how he worked representing some of the New York Times, he did the Iran Contra case. And he said that he knew Turner at the time, like at CNN, they were offering them like all the stuff on that particular story. And he says they turned it down because it would make like, maybe it could hurt American security or it would make America look bad. Or so I perhaps there's this sense of, I don't know, patriotism, like we're protecting, American interests or something. And we're part of that interest. And to that end, like to just see how rallying the cries have been among journalists for, a protection of secrecy and pro censorship and suppression and just not even understanding where that could lead us, where we're at with that in having like the CIA and FBI experts now become commentators on these channels, but the little person who just has like a YouTube channel, we think they're the threat and we're kicking them off. Right. Who can make any sense of it? It is
the FDR. I mean, I think back FDR was protected. They wanted to make sure nobody saw that he was in a wheelchair and all that. And he definitely had a really strong relationship. I don't know if it was starting them, but I do think there was a pretty comfortable relationship between him and the press.
Well, you used to have a lot more journalists. I mean, that's a big thing to remember. The Washington elite journalist crowd often was protective of their institutional sources of power. Yeah. The press has always had a hostile relationship to populists going way, way back. Look at how the New Orleans Times-Picayune treated Huey Long as an example. And now we live in an era where, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is only going to print 2 days out of the week. I mean, that gives you an idea for where our journalism has there's just no jobs in small journalism, local journalism. So, the old school local journalists, like if they did His Girl Friday and they did a remake, they would have to make it all about whether she gets into the cool club at the end, because that's what it feels like institutional journalism is. Are you going to get
Gary Hart? They were going to let Gary Hart go. I mean, it was a Miami reporter who followed her, and everybody at the Washington Post knew about his affairs. They knew about it, and they were going to let him go. It had to be somebody outside the Beltway to get that.
Yeah, we look at Epstein. Epstein's story is broken by the Miami journalist and by Mike Cernovich and by others, not by the New York Journal Time. Everybody in New York knew who and what Epstein was about. I mean, the Whistler, same in L.A. I mean, I went to a Kentucky Derby party with some folks who worked high up for Harvey Weinstein. Got some great advice there from a guy who worked at the Fed. He told me, don't buy property in Malibu, by the way. The property's about to sink. And man, was he right. Thank God. They made some great mint juleps there, too. But I was wondering, like, they were all quiet about, I was like, why are you guys leaving the Weinstein Company? It looks like, they got Quentin Tarantino. He's got all these cool people. And they wouldn't talk about it, but their demeanor was just like, whoa, there's something seriously wrong over at Harvey's company. Then I started hearing other rumors later. And yet all those LA journalists sat on that for a decade plus. I mean, I gave stories to some people in LA that were great stories about high-ranking people. They would never cover them, never run with them. If it meant offending certain institutional protected people. It was all about whether you were protected or not. Like now, once Wesley Snipes was no longer protected, you could run every crazy hit piece you wanted. But if you were still part of the protected class, which Harvey was up until almost the end, it was amazing how long it took for that dam to break. And even still now, I mean, Tara Reid, you had the behavior panel on, Eric. They did a great analysis of Tara Reid and Joe Biden's reaction. And it's clear that Tara Reid is one of the most credible accusers in the Me Too era that exists. And, and look at what the media did with that. They sat and buried on that. In the Me Too era, they buried one of the most clearly convincing, persuasive evidence of abuse. And by the way, there'd been rumors about Biden I'd heard from years.
I was just going to say that when you were done. It's important to note that Biden, there has been for a very long time a lot of talk that Biden and others, Chuck Grassley is another one, can't keep their hands to themselves. And, Fox News let a lot of these old school Republicans, senators including, get away with this stuff, but they're in the club too. Now we have known about Fox News treats women for years. And women who work there, it was not just one guy. Everyone wants to scapegoat Roger Ailes. It's an atmosphere at Fox News, apparently.
Allison worked at Fox News, by the way, back in the day.
Why did we have to go there? Yeah,
I'm not going to.
I have to.
But,
only for a year, and I was right out of college. But I did know the stories about Roger. That was something that was kind of well known at the time.
Everybody knew.
Yeah, you knew if when you were called. Like, it's funny watching that video. What is it? Bombshell? Was that the name of the movie? I was like, God, they got a lot of this right, even down to the way the newsroom was set up. Like, they had the setup of the newsroom the way I remember it, and the second floor and all that stuff. As far as though, like my team and the people that I knew, I never came across, like, I never felt that kind of attention, or I never felt unsafe working there or anything like that. But I did know from like the higher up, like specifically Roger, like that was something that was even for somebody at my level, which I was very low at the time, I knew about.
Yeah, one of them, I don't want to blow him up. He still works there, but he said it's not even like forced actions. I'm not talking about just that. He's like, it's just like a sexcapade over here. He's like, that's it. That's what he's. And we're talking about somebody he has a show. I'm not gonna blow him up, but he's been at Fox for years, and it's just one of those places.
Somebody popped in my head as soon as you said that. Somebody popped in my head. I'm like, probably an editor of a men's magazine at some point, but I'm not sure.
I feel like I saw this kind of stuff though, even in local news stations. There was just kind of I don't know, maybe you're hired because of the way you look in a certain way, so it just breeds that that kind of culture of like fraternity or sorority party. I'm not totally sure, not that it should, but I kind of wonder, because there definitely is behavior that I'm shocked hasn't come out in other newsrooms that I've worked in. It's not just Fox, and like, of course we saw the Matt Lauer case, and so I don't know what it is, if it's a TV thing, because there's just a lot of like, well, we kind of sell ourselves on television, the way we look and the way we appeal to viewers, and so does it have more of that kind of undercurrent than like a newspaper would? I don't know.
Well, I think it's the kind of people who seek power, but like, I mean, I had a story about a high-ranking CBS executive, several executives with detailed stories. It's interesting, the unwillingness of I've given it to several different journalists who initially express interest, and then they back down. I often wonder what's going on. Sometimes I think some of these people use it as blackmail for other stories and don't run my story. But I've had this problem in multiple cases. I'm always trying to find where I can source a story, not leave too many fingerprints. And I mean, but when I think there's pertinent information people should know, never hurts my clients, usually helps my clients, but I don't necessarily want to leave an easy to, breadcrumb trail. I definitely, oh, by the way, I'm going to represent the guy in the Don Lemon suit. So I'm going to be suing Don Lemon.
Well, there we go. Hey, I just broke some news.
Yes, you did. I'm going to be representing him. And, in fact, I think we need to create like a website. So because apparently there's a lot of allegations out there, maybe victims@donlemon.com. Don't know. Well, we'll see. But I think there's somebody that has got away with stuff for some years.
Well, I'm sure I'll never be working at CNN after this live stream.
Well, before we burn the world down, I should wrap it up.
It was a culture, like there was high-ranking people, but when I was out in LA for a long time, there's something about the entertainment and media industries of the men who seek power there, but even sometimes others. There's just a lot of harassment and abuse and there's something in the culture. There's something about why they sought out that job, it used to be my argument for why politicians and people in certain positions of power disproportionately have certain kinds of abuse histories, because what motivates them to seek that power is disproportionately, it's not the right motivation. In other words, the reason why they want power over others, this might apply to judges, by the way, I'll just put that out there. But ask yourself, who is it that wants to have power over other people of a certain kind and prefers power to even money or status or prestige or something else? And there's something in that mindset that disproportionately, that's why, your elementary school teachers are at higher risk of end up being caught up in child abuse charges than other degrees. That doesn't mean all school teachers are bad. It just means that there's people who have a certain kind of mindset who seek out certain kinds of positions because of that mindset, and it reflecting broader in their culture. Because at least my experience has been disproportionately media, Hollywood, disproportionate number of cases that I've had people come from those industries that have victimized other people, either assault, abuse, harassment, discrimination. Like one of the stories that's been buried, that's reflected in Lemon, is I've had a lot of people come to me with stories of men who are harassed by other gay men, but in positions of power. And because, I guess, politically uncool or whatever, it really hasn't got anywhere near the degree of coverage that it should. And it's allowed abusers in that industry to really get away with even more than Harvey Weinstein got away with, arguably. So I think that there's something to that, and there's something more to dig in there, culturally and socially and politically.
Well, folks, we weren't able to solve everything this time, and hopefully I'm going to have everybody back in one fashion or another, because this is great. And there's so much stuff we just barely got started. People can find everybody. Obviously, Rich is at the People's Pundit Daily, and okay, all of us are on Locals now, by the way. We talked about Parler earlier, so folks, if you want to kind of help us survive and whatever else, I'm at unstructured.locals.com. Rich is at peoplespundit.locals.com.
Yep. peoplespundit.locals.com. Yep.
vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which is a harder one for me. And is it AlisonMorrow.locals.com?
Probably.
Probably.
One L.
But yeah, please. And everybody, it really would help. There's a lot of you. I can't believe there's over 2,000. If you can, hit the like button. If you like it, consider subscribing. It does help a lot. It helps me get people like Rich and Robert and Allison to come back on, because, well, they're not going to talk to an empty room. That kind of sucks.
Ask my husband. I'm not sure that's totally true.
Okay. Well, outside of Lynn, they probably definitely want to have an audience. So thank you guys so freaking much. And everybody else out there, thank you.
Bye, everybody.